Okay, I'm at the top of this slope and I wanted just to talk a little bit about the Ecosite classification for this area. You've had a chance to look at the 360 video, and I just want to let you know that I also have done another 360 video of another Catena sequence in this area. It's a little bit different, and so you will have an opportunity to have a look at that too and see if you can figure out the Ecosite classification for those two landscape positions. At the top of the hill here, looking at the key, we're in the Boreal Plain ecozone, and the key on 202 talks about the site having any kind of organic horizons, water table, and they don't. So then we go to the Boreal Plain. Does the site have more than 10% tree cover? And from looking around here, it does. So then we go coniferous trees greater than 75%. Yes, they're all jack pine. So we go to the Boreal Plain Ecosite key. And on that key, it asks if jack pine is greater than 50% of the canopy, and there is completely only jack pine here. And so jack pine's greater than 90%. And then reindeer lichen, again here on the ground, you can see we have a lot of this reindeer lichen, this Catena species. And because it's more than 25% in this particular general area, then this would be a BP2. And if you just turn over a couple pages to BP2, that's the jack pine lichen ecosite. And again, it'll give you an idea of the vegetation that's associated with this, as well as some of the soils information and some of the forestry information. So, top of the slope, we're at a BP2, a jack pine lichen ecosite. And now we'll go down to the bottom of the slope, and you've seen some changes with the 360 video, and we will then talk about what is the ecosite classification down there. So here we are down at the bottom of this Catena landscape, and I wanted to go through the Ecosite guide again to figure out what this site would be classified as. It's always important to understand, what's the relationship between the vegetation we see and the soils that we see and the landscape position that it's on. And so really this is what we're trying to do with this series of videos, is truly trying to understand relationships between vegetation and soils and that grouping together on a landscape sequence. So down here at this bottom depression area, it's kind of level actually here, you see that the vegetation from the 360 video and even from the video now, that it's very different than it was at the top. There's a lot more ground cover, a lot of different species here, and the question then is what does this classify as an ecosite using the guide? And again, we have jack pine stands around us, completely 100% jack pine. And so if you're off to the key here, it says jack pine is greater than 90% of the canopy. Yes, it is. And then it asks, is reindeer lichen cover greater than 25% of the forest floor? And if you look around, there is a little bit of reindeer lichen, but not 25%. There's a lot more moss here and some more understory kind of species. And so we would have to say no. And so that turns us into a BP3. And if you flip over a couple pages, BP3 is a jack pine feather moss ecosite. And so it's a little bit different than what was at the top of the hill, mainly because it has a few more herb species. Particularly we've got wild lily of the valley, we've got some grasses, and I think even over there somewhere I saw some wild sarsaparilla. And so it's got a little bit more moisture here and nutrients that would allow this vegetation to be here versus what we saw at the top of the hill earlier. So top of the hill was a BP2. This is a BP3, which is Boreal Plains 3, which is jack pine feather moss. And now what we're going to do is dig a couple soil pits at each of these two locations to figure out what the soils are. And what I want you to do is think about what kinds of soils might you anticipate finding when we do these pits. So that's something you can think about, and then we will get into classifying these soils and figuring out what we have here in terms of soils. So I forgot to mention at the top of the hill we had this jack pine tree that had this abnormal growth on it. And so I was able to find another tree down here. And actually this is called Dwarf Mistletoe. And I just wanted to show you an example of what that is. Here's the Dwarf Mistletoe right here attached to the tree. And this Dwarf Mistletoe produces a hormone which then causes the tree to grow abnormally in kind of clumps and what we call brooms. And this eventually will actually cause the tree to die. And so across the way here was actually harvested to get rid of mistletoe, and a new plantation was planted. But I just wanted to point this out, that a lot of our jack pine forests along the southern boundary of the boreal forest across the province are infected with mistletoe. And really the best way to get rid of it is to eradicate it with a fire. But of course, because we're so close to towns and cities and stuff, that's just not going to happen. So they'll have to find other ways to do that. But again, this little guy here is a dwarf mistletoe, and it's interesting too that it is able to pop its spores, catapult them out of these little pods here about 20 meters into the air. And so that's how they actually infect other trees around them.